It wasn't that long ago where if you drove down the 110 toward San Pedro, this is what you saw. Record cargo numbers, ships backed up for miles to dock at the Port of Los Angeles, and delays in supply chains as a result. Welcome to Inside the Issues. I'm Ariel Wesler in for Alex Cohen. Most recently, though, things have slowed down a bit for the Port of LA. Its cargo volume dropped 20% from August through the end of 2022. Importers were concerned about labor disputes and delays, so they diverted goods to other U.S. ports, mainly New York and New Jersey, who saw some of the biggest benefits. Earlier today, the port laid out its priorities for the year ahead in its State of the Port address, including things like reducing emissions and improving its workforce.
We must think about what it means to be a sustainable port. Yes, it means sustainable environmental practices. But sustainability also means leadership that leaves no one behind, a workforce that's empowered for the future, and an economy that benefits everyone.
And joining us now to talk a little bit more about what's ahead for the Port of Los Angeles is Executive Director Gene Seroka in the flesh. Gene, Happy New Year to you, and great to have you back in person.
Oh, it's wonderful to be in the studio with you, Ariel. Thank you.
I know this is the first State of the Port address that you've had in person since COVID, so I'm sure that was exciting to be back. We talked a little bit about the cargo shifts, the labor disputes. Even with all that, though, you still had the second best year in the port's 115-year history. What do you credit for that?
That speaks a lot to our workforce leadership here in the city, state of California, as well as throughout private sector industry. The confidence level that the importers and exporters have in us, and the shipping lines, the marine terminal operators, and so many others, truckers, railroads, really doing their job day in and day out.
Many economists expecting perhaps a recession at some point this year. I know the port can often be an economic indicator of sorts. Are you seeing any kinds of signs at this point of a possible looming recession?
Now, it's talked about morning, noon, and night, as you know. But I've been through 7 different economic shocks in my career, and we haven't seen one like this. 11 million jobs open nationwide, the lowest unemployment since the late 1960s, a consumer spending pattern that continues strong, even with the numbers that came out for December. Year on year, overall, for 2022, it was a great retail sales year, and buoying our economy with 70% of that activity continues to look good. Now, we may have a little bit of a bumpy landing, or it may be a shallow look at the economic downturn, but I honestly don't see right now the makings of a recession, and even some of the leaders in the economic world are saying pretty much the same thing.
As for the holidays coming out of 2022, that was good news for you guys?
Yeah, realistically, it was a 7.5% jump in retail sales, unadjusted for inflation. So it would rival, once those adjustments come in and they're published, it would rival last year's all-time record year in our nation's history by about just enough to say we got the best year going again.
We talk about cargo a lot when it comes to the port, but a lot of people can relate to it because of cruises. They have not been able to go on a cruise for the longest time. Many people, were ready to get back to cruising. The industry, though, still looking to rebound. It still has struggles ahead of it. I'm curious locally, what are you seeing when it comes to cruises out of the Port of LA, and do they seem to be bouncing back? What are you expecting this year?
Yeah, coming out of 2022, Ariel, it was a banner year. 229 sailings in the cruise business last year, and in 23 we're projecting even more. That equates to about $250 million of economic activity within a 2-mile radius of the port. So our shops, our restaurants, even our hotels benefit from all that drive traffic that comes down to go sail to the Mexican Riviera or out to Hawaii. This is big business that's only going to grow.
And for viewers who don't know, actually, I should mention, I understand that the wait time for cargo ships, we showed you in the beginning, you were well aware of the lines of cargo ships waiting to dock. It's dropped by 75%, the time to unload. What do you attribute that to? And then what do you think have been some of the biggest benefits there?
Well, it was interesting, and not to be flippant, but I think the industry needed an IV. They needed better information and higher levels of velocity of all this cargo. What that means is we created the nation's first and still only port community information system, aggregating all the data that's out there on ships and traffic and timing, and we put it all into one clear pane of glass. So we can see now 40 days upstream before a vessel comes in and begins to work. better to plan our land use, skilled labor, and machinery. We used that during the peak of peaks during COVID to see why cargo ships were backing up and so much of the product was sitting on the ground. What we found was that a very high percentage of our goods were sitting for 9 days or longer. And that's a lifetime in our industry. So we just simply tried to segment that cargo away and then get the product to market that needed to. So as we came into 2022, in January, on the 9th day, we had 109 ships sitting outside the ports. We worked that down to single digits by the first week of August and set records for volume throughput 5 of the first 7 months. So it was about using the port as a transit facility, not a warehouse, and having the information to be able to do that.
And part of that process, I know, is this innovative, the port optimizer, right, that I've heard you talk about, kind of this digital tracking portal to try to help everything run smoothly. Can you talk about some of the additions that you're making to that port optimizer, including, you mentioned a trucking reservation or truck reservation system? Yeah,
and this is the interesting part, too. We're going to have an export module, one for the warehouses. Southern California has 2 billion square feet of warehousing from the Pacific out to the desert region, big part of our business. But the truck reservation system is going to be unique because even today, more than 50% of our available truck gates go unused every day. That would be like having a restaurant with 100 seats and you're only seating 50 people at breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So we've got to squeeze more efficiency out of that. And if we have a reservation system that covers all of our marine terminals, where folks on the trucking community side can access and plan their pickups and deliveries much more seamlessly and quicker, we can get some of that latent capacity really moving at the port.
I want to talk a little bit about the negotiations taking place between dock workers and employers. I know you can't speak for either side, but can you give us any kind of sense of how that's going? I mean, do you know when labor disputes perhaps could be resolved? What's your sense?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, too. We're at the outer edges of when historically these agreements start to come together. These guys and ladies have been at the table since May the 10th of last year, and now we're starting to work our way into February. But I will say that collective bargaining is hard work. And in this case, not only do we have a coastal framework from the state of Washington down to San Diego, but we've also got 29 ports where local agreements have to be codified. And to get all the way up and down the coast, plus that big West Coast framework, takes a lot of time. Now, there's been interest from many parties, and I was really happy to see what both the employers and the union did. Early on, they put out 2 press releases, jointly signed, saying we will not strike and we will not lock out the workforce. That had never been done before. President Biden, to my recollection, is the only sitting president to meet with both sides during an active negotiation, which he did at the Port of Los Angeles on the USS Iowa, June 10th. Here again, with all these pieces, it still wasn't enough to convince the American importer and exporter, keep your cargo flowing through Los Angeles. So I've been crisscrossing the country, sharing the ground truth with these cargo owners, the service providers, and make sure they know productivity is at all-time highs. We've got capacity to move cargo. Let's shift it back this way. But folks still want that labor agreement done so they have confidence. And I understand that sensitivity because the last 3 years, are you going to go into a 4th year and tell your boss, I got stuck in LA once again? So some of these moves may be considered overcorrection, but I am very sensitive as to why they took place.
We've got a little bit of time left. You talked about the importance of a sustainable port, zero-emission cargo handling equipment by 2030, and zero-emission trucks by 2035. Can you briefly tell us how you plan to make that happen? I know half the port trucks come from small businesses. This can be costly.
Yeah, it really is unique. Our focus should be on how we accelerate the technology and find the funding streams to make it commercially affordable. As you rightly say, just a little bit less than half of the trucks are owned by small businesses that we classify as companies with 5 rigs or less. Those trucks typically cost about $50,000 on the second or third hand market. These prototypes of battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell are 8 to 10 times that. Plus, we've got insurance and tax issues, which add up additional costs. So we're working with elected officials, policymakers across the country and here in California to see what can be done with tax code, insurance regulations, and giving confidence to the manufacturers and their tiered suppliers that we're a good market here, but we need to expand to give them the ability to turn those lines over and make more trucks.
All right.
We represent only 2 weeks worth of North American heavy-duty truck production and buy our trucks as an industry once every 13 years. We've got to shift that market a little bit to give these manufacturers confidence.
All right, Gene Seroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles. Always great to talk to you. Thank you for giving us some insight. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ariel.